So we are now welcoming Peter Lavelle, and he is an awesome journalist. He is the host of Crosstalk on RT, and I'm so glad that he has been willing to speak to us and participating in this vigil. Peter, hi, how are you doing? You're muted. One moment. You're muted. Basically, Zoom does this to every single panelist. You just have to press. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Awesome.
First time I'm doing it this way, so I'm learning. Okay.
Not a problem.
Listening to what Kim had to say, absolutely fascinating, excellent questions on your part, and I know a lot about asking questions. So go right ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask, when did you first become aware of WikiLeaks, and how did you become drawn to, supporting them and supporting Julian Assange's work?
Well, Private Manning, when the great documents dump, with Afghanistan and the infamous video to this day, I remember very vividly how the quote unquote mainstream media was actually maybe not sympathetic, but very curious about all of this, Julian Assange. I can remember doing programs on it, and people couldn't even pronounce his last name because this was such a out of the blue story, and. Of course, it was very valuable, the kind of information, because I was, and people that I know were always against those wars. And then to finally learn the truth that we were pretty much on mark, all the lies that we were told, all the fabrications. So it's such a valuable source. And it has woken up a lot of people. But because people are being woken up, there's a lot of pushback from the deep state. The deep state exists to watch people like us watching this podcast. Well, it's not to find terrorists. No, not at all. It's to keep tabs on us because they're afraid of us. Okay. I mean, fighting terrorism, then why have they supported ISIS from the very, very beginning in Syria? I mean, it's all a farce. Okay. What they're doing is massive surveillance of us. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have told us so much about that. And it has shown how much the deep state fabricates, lies, and punishes people that speak out. And that's exactly what they do. We have to do this right now. And, on a good day, I'm slightly optimistic. Usually I'm pretty pessimistic about it because of all of the tech companies throttling people like ourselves. I know it was that Proper Not thing that came out after Trump was elected. I was affiliated with 3 of the institutions. I think I got on more than anybody else, okay? And so, and I see it in my Facebook. I think I see things being deleted all the time. My program, for example, 2 or 3 weeks later, there's an algorithm that just takes it away. They don't want people to watch it. I follow Julian Assange and WikiLeaks from the very, very beginning because it has replaced media. I mean, WikiLeaks came into being because it had to be invented because of the low scale, low quality, very maniacal mainstream media, because they've been fused into power. There's no difference anymore. I mean, I'll betray my age by saying this. I remember the end of the Vietnam War, and people like Walter Cronkite at CBS. You have to remember, the mainstream media, the television networks, and of course the print media, they went along with Johnson. They went along with it. They always go along with it. And then Walter Cronkite and people like Walter Cronkite, they went to Vietnam. And they said, this doesn't make any, you're telling me this. I'm reporting this because you tell us this. It's not true. And he was one of the great souls of the profession that said, no, I'm not going to carry water for the Pentagon anymore. And he started that push. And then we had Watergate, where we had, a democracy dies in darkness. They were sunlight. My God, those days are completely gone.
And what do you think has caused that?
Yeah, well, no, I think it's greed. I think it's careers. Mediocre people get elevated so high. You get perfect hair, perfect teeth, smile, and just read the script, and you'll be fine. You'll be famous. You'll be taken care of. You don't have to think much.
Exactly.
Seriously. I mean, it's exactly that way. You remember Chris Cuomo? You shouldn't be reading these leaks because, they're private property, but I will interpret them for you. That guy's going to interpret it for me? Are you serious? Really?
absolutely
I couldn't
ridiculous.
believe he would actually say something that on live television. I mean, the Clown Network News, they're going to tell me how to think? And then you look at these former FBI, CIA, NSA people. Now they're pundits on the cable stations. I mean,
Yeah.
this is incestuous.
Openly. They don't even have a pretense of being separated.
They do it shamelessly. It's shameless now. Okay. And they get to peddle whatever conspiracy theory they want. They can destroy any individual. Everything is, I hate to use the word, trumped up these days. Okay. And that is actually a defense of Donald Trump. I abhor many things that he says, what he does. I understand why he was elected. But having, again, this is another step of just fusing the deep state with corporatism, and the media is just their cheerleader here. They spied on his campaign. That's obvious right now, okay? But it tells you what they're capable of doing and what they will do. And I agree with what Kim said earlier. They're going to make sure they don't get caught next time, okay? Because they got really sloppy, because they're arrogant. They believe that they have all power, and they know they can punish. So I agree with Kim. They're going to make sure they're not caught the next time around. But we have to worry about Twitter and Facebook, all of these things. They were supposed to be a great liberating element for us. Like, remember, a level playing field where this would be the ultimate expression of democracy, where everyone has a voice. And it's really tragic to see how these quote unquote liberals, and I know this is bipartisan, so I won't break the peace here, but it's really sad how technology at one point in the beginning was such a beacon of hope, and it's actually turned into a tyranny. And again, that's why Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is so absolutely necessary. You know, there's a German philosopher, his name is Habermas, and he talked about the development of the public sphere. And actually, WikiLeaks is that, because the public sphere were individuals communicating with each other. And sometimes it was very mundane, like when ships would come into port and what time, what are they carrying? And people would start making entrepreneurial decisions. And the state wasn't controlling it. The church wasn't controlling it. These were people coming out and communicating with people like themselves. And so we have this new way. WikiLeaks is like that. It's a new center where people can go and communicate and believe and trust. You know, Julian Assange has never given anyone up. And everything that he's done that I'm aware of, he's always been right. There's been no fabrication, no lies. He doesn't carry water for anyone. And, you know, he's got a good road record. Nobody can stand up to that road record. And on top of it, the physical pain that he must be going through, not being able to see his children grow up, his health issues, these are human rights issues, the blatant breaking of the law, and the crass hypocrisy from the U.S. and the U.K. governments. So we have to talk about Julian Assange. We have to talk about WikiLeaks, because it is one little ray of hope out there in a sea of darkness.
Absolutely. And as a journalist who's been observing this from the outside, what do you think about the active silencing of press freedoms of Julian Assange? He's literally being prosecuted for doing his job, as Kim said earlier. How did we get here in journalism? I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that shift from, you know, democracy dies in darkness over to this corrupt, openly shameless situation that we have. So what do you think was behind that? Or is it just sort of natural?
Well, it's the national security state, okay? You know, you're just going to have to trust me. You know, I know better. I mean, it's really quite incredible. And I understand how people, I mean, it's from time immemorial. You know, we can go back to ancient Greece and Rome. You'll give up your freedoms for security. Okay, it's nothing new. And it's being played out again. But at least in the West, there was a tradition of holding power to account.
Absolutely.
And this is what we used to call journalism, real journalism. And that role has been fused into the state, and it's been left benign. And now it just peddles. I mean, it's clickbait. It's shifting the topic, determining the narrative. I mean, they're useful idiots, and talking about real issues is not what the news does anymore. Because if you
Absolutely.
really did talk about what's really going on, that might cause debate. And debate might talk about policy. But it's never that, okay? I'm sorry, Roseanne lost her show, but I don't care. I don't.
Yeah, we see that with so many narratives that are pushed over and over again and are not substantial and don't affect the vast majority of the American public at all. At least that's the way it seems. But
and also, is it one of the you could look at the 2003 illegal invasion of Iraq. That's a very interesting tipping point because people were embedded. No, they were in bed, okay, and they were perfectly willing to go along with it. And because I remember, again, betraying my age, I remember, and it was still black and white TVs. I remember every single night watching the carnage of Vietnam. And when people saw that, I said, but why? What are we getting out of this? And so and there were journalists that did go to Iraq. They had their accreditation fiddled with. They didn't get protection. I mean, they made it tough to be a journalist. Robert Fisk is a good one that comes to my mind, okay? Fearless. He didn't carry water for anyone, but he's in a minority. Everyone else, it's just like a junket. It's a lifelong junket. And if you look at the revolving door of people going in from the state, from media, from arms producers, it's all revolving. Everybody takes care of everybody because, particularly I've been living abroad for most of my life, not my adult life, most of my life. And so I'm not really up on the nuances of domestic U.S. policy or UK or something like that. I'm much more interested in international politics. And, no debate on foreign policy. And I think that's really, really tragic because wars are fought for, it's interesting, a country is targeted as a threat. They destroy the country and then they make the taxpayer rebuild it so we can do it all over again. And that's exactly what it is. It goes over and over again. So there's no debate here. I think also when it comes to media, and again, I don't want to be partisan here. I don't want to break the peace, but it's very, very one-sided ideologically speaking. Okay.
Well, actually, that's not partisan at all.
I'm a conservative. I feel that conservatives are being whacked left and right for having their opinions, and I want to have civil discourse. Very civil. I mean, some of my best friends are progressives. You know why? Because we can have a real conversation.
Exactly. Yes.
Real.
No, I think that I think virtually all of our panelists would agree that there is sort of this establishment core that doesn't really subscribe to left or right ideology. And so that's why it's so important to unite together against that, because that's what they're doing to us. But I also think that, going to your point earlier about the revolving door that between the financial sector, journalism, the intelligence agencies, in what ways do you think the WikiLeaks case, evolving over the years, with you having followed it from the beginning, has been unique in exposing that revolving door? Because it's opened my eyes to the reality of how the banking sector and the private corporations and then the military are all so interrelated in their attacks on WikiLeaks.
I think it's interesting, and probably for a lot of people, yourself, myself, and a lot of people watching this, we all had suspicions that all of this was true because we were called conspiracy theorists. Remember?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, we were all conspiracy theorists, and then with these WikiLeaks, like pretty much on the mark. I mean, I've talked to over the last decade, talking to people, And the thing is, I instinctively thought the national security state was to spy on all of us, or people that were politically interested and active. So that was a confirmation of it all. I think this is what the ruling elites, the financial sector, the Hollywood, everyone is that it's kind of blue. Julian Assange blew the cover off, and it's not pretty what everybody sees. It's not pretty.
Exactly.
And they have no explanation for it. They can't say, "Oh, you caught me." No, they can't say that because then they all go to jail, as they should. Okay, but and who's in jail right now? I mean, in every sense, Julian Assange is in jail, and they will get rid of him. I'm sorry to say this, maybe I shouldn't, but they're going to do everything they can to eliminate him to the ultimate degree. Unfortunately, they will not allow him. They will not allow him because it will set a precedent. You can't get away with it. We will make you suffer. Okay, and Julian is really sacrificing himself for the ultimate cause. Again, I don't want to get too ideological here, but the one of the very pillars of the civilization that is so criticized now in the West is freedom of speech, of the sovereign individual. Here's a sovereign individual speaking, the logos. It goes to the very beginning, all right? And having him shut down an attack like this is the ultimate attack on our traditions, okay? And it is unconscionable. Tommy Robinson, somebody I wouldn't, I don't like him. I don't like what he says. But the way he was treated by the British police, that's wrong. We have to stand up and say, you can't do that. We have due process. And we need sunlight. We need to have everyone seeing what's going on. It happens more and more often. Unfortunately for Julian Assange, he's the most blatant case of people denied a due process. And a lot of people know it, but they don't have the integrity of the guts to say, this is wrong. Resolve the issue. Have an open trial if that's even possible. Again, I was listening to Kim.com. I tend to agree with him that he wouldn't be able to get a free trial. I think that, I know Julian has Ecuadorian citizenship. I think the international community should recognize that. Let him leave the embassy, get on an airplane and go to Ecuador, okay? His destination, that's where he wants to go, and that should be the case. Look what happened to Snowden. Okay, he didn't want to come to where I live. It wasn't his destination, but he had his passport pulled, okay? And he is here, okay? So, again, he should be allowed to go to a destination where he wishes to go. I guess what really is so sad for me is that Julian Assange's case is so well known if you want to know about it. And that's why I don't usually do these things, go to these podcasts. But for me, I have to stand up for what I think is right, okay? It doesn't mean I like everything that Julian has done or said. No, it's a principle. What happened to principles in our public life? Everyone is so cowed and so afraid. And I refuse to live like that. And I think a lot of people watching this feel the same way. And I hope we can get more people. I have a feeling that when I advertised this on Facebook, I have a feeling that it was throttled because I asked a few people about it. So they're watching. We've
been experiencing a lot of shadow banning and censorship on Twitter of this event and of the hashtag associated with it. Definitely. No, it's a definite attempt to strangle this message getting out. But that's why it's more important than ever to speak as loudly as we possibly can. And what do you, I know that, we've had the privilege of speaking with you and Ross Cameron earlier, both journalists with large platforms that care about, as you said, principles, and in that way supporting Julian Assange. What is it that is unique about you all and your choice to speak out for Julian Assange that so many other journalists don't make that decision?
Well,
I mean, there should be more journalists speaking out for Assange, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
I think you're right, and I think journalists are very shameful. I mean, particularly before we did this, I went through YouTube last night and I looked at all of the condemnations of journalists of Julian Assange, which what a betrayal of the profession. But they get paid really well for it. Journalism wasn't a really well-paid profession before. I mean, it was people of passion. It was people of passion that really wanted to do it. Now that people cash in on it, okay, it's cable TV and some YouTubers are pretty good at it and stuff like that.
Well, then there's like two or three companies owning the entire.
Right. Well,
Constellation News.
I have the luxury where I don't have to worry. I don't have to look over my shoulder. Okay, I'm more free than most journalists, I suppose, because I'm given a blank check. Just do whatever I want to do, and I really like that. I think a lot of other people, particularly in the multimedia, I'm thinking about television. And some of the podcasts that the major newspapers do and things like that, they're afraid for their career. Nobody wants to get out of line. It's not worth it. These people supported the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. They don't want to admit that they were wrong. They don't want to admit that they actually were carrying water for the Bush administration or what happened in Libya. Nobody wants to own up to their words and their behavior, because then you'd have to have a lot of introspection and kind of look at what kind of person you are. And it's too easy just to say, well, he violated national security. Well, I mean, all of our security is at stake when one man like Julian Assange is silenced. People got to make that connection here. You have to make that connection. And if you don't, then you're in denial. People are in denial. And
absolutely.
It's so easy to be in denial when they dangle little trinkets in front of your eyes, okay? And people go for it, okay? That's why the moral integrity of journalism is just dropped through the floor. I remember growing up, look at, Carl Bernstein and people like that. I mean, I don't know him, but he seems to have portrayed everything about journalism since the Watergate. I mean, I watch him on cable TV and it's just like, what happened? What happened to you? Where's your skepticism? You were skeptical. You didn't believe the state. You didn't believe fake narratives that were fed to you. You followed up on it, but it's gone. Poof, it's gone.
So true. And I have a question from our viewers, actually. And one of them asked, now that the US military is in Ecuador, or I think correcting that, it would be that they've made a deal with Ecuador, should Assange go there if given the chance? And will that be safe for him? I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a personal decision that Julian has to make. The thing is, okay, I'll give a quick example, kind of answer the question. On 2 different occasions, a ceasefire was arranged in Syria. And on both occasions, a false flag operation was invented to break it up. And it was the US that did that. They broke their word, obviously, openly. So if the US said they promised an airplane would leave London to make it to Ecuador, I don't know. I'm sorry. The track record is just way too long. There has to be another way of doing it. And I don't know what way that would be. I don't, okay? But I just wouldn't trust. There are too many people in the US security apparatus that have it out for Julian. And they will hunt him down to the very, very end. Because these people are pathological. They're pathological. You can't deal with them. You can't communicate with them. Oh, because you end up being somebody's puppet, somebody's mouthpiece, useful idiot. See, you can't, that's what's so sad for me is that I always tell people, just give me 30 minutes of calm, just 2 one-on-one, and I can maybe change your world just a little bit, maybe to engage the conversation a little bit further. But no, there's this wall, can't talk to that person, can't talk to that person, can't consider that thought, okay? And this is what we've got, can you hear me? I can't hear you though.
Sorry, I was muted. I was going to say, that reminds me of the purity test. So if you're friends with so-and-so, I can't talk to you. And the way that builds these echo chambers that we all reside in these little separate bubbles that can't interact. And,
But that's design. That's by design.
Exactly.
The thing is that I always, when I come across the liberals and progressives, I have a great time with them. If there's goodwill, if there's good faith, then it can be fascinating. Talking to other conservatives gets boring for me because we just agree on too much.
Yeah, it's an echo chamber. And that's why it's so important. What we're doing here is to bring those different perspectives and bubbles together and to cross those barriers, because it is so easy to fall into that. Do you have any thoughts on what viewers can do? Because we recognize that there is so much censorship, that there is so much pushback against support for Julian. But the one positive thing is that the gagging of Julian is causing a backlash, which is the increased support for Julian Assange in light of the obvious persecution of him. So how do you think people can capitalize on that positive energy?
Well, I think I think there are those of us that have followed the story and we know what's really at stake here. But I think at least maybe to get more people interested in Julian Assange is the gross violation of his human rights. That's one way to start. It's one way to start. Okay, you may not like his ideas, you may not like what he has done, but look, he's being persecuted by the state, and it seems to me that everything is contrived. It contrived on this statute, this law. I mean, it seems like to me they're making laws for him to break. Okay, or inventing them somehow. I'm not a lawyer, so be careful. But I think just an awareness of the human side of the story that might interest people. the way he's been portrayed, what was it? He should be shot. He should be
Yes.
hung.
Yes, I'm surprised that more people haven't reported on that. Disability Media actually did write an article when Julian Assange, before he was gagged, it was last year actually, compiled a very long thread of all of these pundits and journalists calling for him to be executed and the torture of WikiLeaks staff. It was awful.
You know what? If you were to say something like that to me on this podcast right now, threatening my life or my livelihood, someone should call the organizer of this platform and have you banned, because you shouldn't be doing that. But you can do that on cable TV, okay?
Exactly.
And then not only that, people echo it. It's like pile on. Who can be more cruel, okay? And for me, for people that do that, they've lost their humanity. They've sold their soul for fame and fortune, okay? I mean, what is it? Rachel Maddow makes over $30,000 a night spewing a very one-sided narrative. Again, I don't want to break the peace, okay?
Oh, no, it's totally fine. I don't think I think, as somebody who voted for Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein, I have no love for Rachel Maddow whatsoever. So that's totally not a problem. But
But what they're doing to Julian, you see, it's just not that. It's just not the rule of law. I mean, and now I'm going to go after your heartstrings right now.
It's fine. It's fine.
Nobody wants to. It's only people like us on platforms like this that want to talk. And I see you had H.A. Goodman on. Great guy. I love that guy.
H.A. is awesome.
Democracy. Openness. I mean, in broad daylight, it's stolen from Bernie Sanders. In broad light,
exactly.
Everybody knows it. We all know it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And this is this corrosive effect. People that follow Julian Assange's story know he's being done wrong, and we all know that. We know that it's a human rights violation what they're doing to him. We all know that. There's so many obvious truths out there. They stole the election from Bernie. Okay. The deep state was probably fiddling with the 2016 election. We all know that. But it's never front and center, because you know why? If you deal with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and you deal with it honestly, then you have to ask a lot more questions about yourself and what you think and how you feel about it, and what's it going to do to your career. So this is from a journalist point of view. This is what I see so much. Why did you write that art? Why did you have that title on your article? I didn't do that. Was my editor. Well, but it's misleading. Your whole article, the title is misleading to the whole article. Why don't you step up and say you're fiddling with my intellectual content? But nobody has the courage to do that.
Yeah, the cowardice is amazing to witness, and the unwillingness to raise your own head up above the crowd and say this is wrong. It's really, really sad, a sad comment on the state of journalism. And I think Julian Assange has said this a number of times, that essentially journalism, and I think you said this earlier in the segment, but essentially journalism is dead in the sense of the way that it was or what we consider journalism, as you were saying, a check and balance against the state. It's pretty much literally an organ of the state now. In every way possible, as we discussed with the blatant CIA pundits, et cetera, et cetera.
But that's what creates totalitarianism, okay? And
exactly.
you know what? And I'll tell you, and I'll tell viewers here, okay? I'm not like these pundits on cable TV that talk about things that they know nothing about. I lived in communist Eastern Europe for many years, in Poland. I traveled all through the Eastern Bloc. I know what it means when the media is an arm of the state. I saw it with my own eyes, okay? And it ain't pretty, okay? And that's why there were underground presses. I remember living in communist Poland, and I helped people with that because I truly believed that you needed to have freedom of speech. Okay, and that's what's happening here. The thing is that I guess it's because we have commercials and we have Stormy Daniels and all that. I mean, authoritarianism and totalitarianism just comes with a smile or as a joke. Okay,
exactly.
And
yes, I think it's packaged as entertainment,
sugar coated. Okay, and let's have an up close and personal story about this person. No, I want policy. I need a discussion about policy. I don't need you to give me a cup and fill my tears with it. Okay, and that's what they do all of the time. But no, Julian Assange is a monster. See how extreme everything gets. The facts don't matter. It is the spin. It's the spin is what matters. Okay. And he's a monster, and we will never let anyone let this happen again, because he will be an example. They even say he will be an example. No, due process. We still have laws.
And the constant hyperbole, like you're talking about with, especially with Julian Assange, it desensitizes us, the viewers, to facts. Yep. We don't even, the facts are dull and boring compared to these buzzwords that we're just fed constantly. And so they just slip through the cracks and they get forgotten. And there's so much of the history of Julian Assange, not only of the persecution of WikiLeaks, but of the support for WikiLeaks and the support he provided for people like Edward Snowden. So much history is just lost because it disappears amongst all of those buzzwords that we pay attention to.
Well, the thing is that one of the reasons why we have the low quality journalism that we have now is the powers that be, the tech companies, Hollywood, the financial system. They're basically saying to what we can use the term legacy media is that we'll get you your monopoly back, but it comes at a price, okay? So the major cables, you can stay, have a little variety there, okay? You can have Rachel Maddow and you can have Carl Tuckerson, okay? I like Carl Tuckerson. But we'll go after WikiLeaks, we'll go after alternative media, we'll let you keep your monopoly, and we'll throttle people, and we'll disappear people, we'll ban people. You can keep your monopoly, but you got to read the script, and it works for them. That's one of the reasons why they sell their soul. I mean, the Washington Post, I mean, if it wasn't Jeff Bezos, it would be gone. Okay, it's just a rag. Okay, it'd be gone.
Exactly.
Okay? And this is what we have over and over again. But then we have consortiumnews.com.
That is an amazing publication.
Working people. Joe Loria, the new editor over there, awesome guy, good friend of mine. I mean, they're in the trenches. These people are not. The good thing is a lot of people that write for that, they're retired. They have pensions. They got pensions from the baby boomer pension, okay, which will never happen again. And then I won't get it. They do it for love, passion. I've talked to some of the writers. It's passion. I say, why do you do it? You don't have to do this. I know you've got grandchildren. Ray McGovern. Look at Ray.
Amazing human being.
They beat him up. He's almost 80 years old, for God's sake. I saw the video. You don't need to brutalize people. No, it's an example. You step out of line, and plus, with 26 years experience at the CIA, I bet he's got a few things to say. Okay,
exactly.
That's what they're worried about. They're worried about that because Ray McGovern's standing in the public is impeccable. I mean, we all know that. Okay,
and even when they were manhandling him and dislocating his shoulder, he did manage to actually get out coherent sentences about black site in Thailand. I was just amazed at his ability to do that.
I had him on my program a few days later, and he came out with such good humor. He showed his wrists; they were purple. Purple. Oh my God!
Absolutely insane.
What did we become? What did we become?
And it's interesting with your perspective as a journalist, because when we talk about the media and their, just being so, I guess, homogenated or monotonized, it's really, really interesting as well to see them not putting two and two together, that the prosecution of WikiLeaks and of Julian Assange for doing effective journalism is also going to impact them. They seem to be blind to this. And do you think that that's because they just assume it won't happen to them? Or what? How can they be so blind?
I mean, it kind of cuts both ways, doesn't it? I mean, wow, Julian Assange didn't play by the rules. He kind of got out of line, and look what they did to him. So, I mean, this is what they absorbed the wrong lesson. The lesson should be stand up straight and speak truth. Okay,
absolutely.
And there may be consequences, but they draw the opposite conclusion: is that I'm not going to get out of line. I have a great gig going here. Here, I just got another message on WhatsApp. Oh, okay, I know what to write now. Okay, and that's exactly it. Okay. No, I mean, I don't want to go into it here because I wouldn't want to be very precise. But I could go tell you writers for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, like we can identify who are the point people for the deep state. I mean, they come out, instantly, and create these talking points. It's standard, okay? And people that like ourselves that watch the news, we know this. It's like a signal. Okay, Joe Smith over at the Washington Post says this. Oh, that's a signal that's coming from the CIA. Okay, because they're just a conveyor belt. They're just a conveyor belt.
And I think that another aspect of that, specifically with the Washington Post and the CIA, is the recognition that this is not based on a profit model. As you mentioned before, right. The Washington Post is not trying to get a bunch of viewers and subscribers. If they did, then they would break that monotony and actually raise their head up and try to strive for real investigative journalism. But when you have somebody like Jeff Bezos, who also has a contract with the CIA for a cloud with Amazon. Yeah, right. When you have that individual buying the Washington Post for him a trivial amount, you really do see that this is not about a profit. This is not profit driven. It is to control the social discourse, and I think that has been on. You can see that on YouTube. You can see it in multiple different platforms and outlets.
Well, you can see it happening with Facebook as well. Okay,
absolutely.
I memean, I find it really, really terrifying what's happening. Is because I know some really good people, Patrick Henningsen over at 21st Century Wire News. I mean, he's been through the ringer over and over and over again. I don't always agree with what he has to say, but it's well thought out. And let readers decide and have a debate, have a discussion here. Because Washington, I mean, the only time I come across the Washington Post is when someone says, "Hey, have you read this sack of shit here? Read this." That's how I come across the Washington Post. Sorry for my language, but that's the only time I come across it. Is this pure contempt of what they're reporting? Okay, particularly on where I live, which is sensitive to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think as well, like not only does, and just returning to Jeff Bezos for a moment, not only is he somebody who has so much control over the Washington Post, we also had legacy press outlets and establishment media actually shouting that he should be nominated to be director of the CIA before we, had Haspel and all of that. Yeah, no, I mean, actual press outlets were advocating for that. So the state of journalism is absolutely sad.
Well, I guess, well, using that logic, Tony Soprano should be a Supreme Court justice. Okay,
exactly.
At least there wouldn't be any pretense anymore. Okay, I mean, that's one of the things I find really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I like Julian, because the U.S. talks about democracy promotion and stuff like that. I tell people it's only people in the media and in the greater Washington, D.C. area that ever say that, because nobody believes it anymore. Okay, these people are so imprisoned in their rhetoric. Okay, and that's why I get in trouble repeatedly with the regulatory people in the UK. They're really not nice to me, and I have to be careful what I have to say about that. But and I just call it as I see it. I think to use the American phrase, like it's balls and strikes. Okay, that's how I see it. Okay, and I'm more than willing to have someone push back. I mean, I was on after the MH17 flight was shot down, the Malaysian aircraft was shot down over Ukraine. I was on New Day with Chris Cuomo.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's hilarious. I mean, he thought it was going to be a walk in the park, and I just ripped into him. I mean, I got so many messages about that. My boss called me. And she said, so how'd it go? And I said, well, I don't know if I won, but I certainly didn't lose. And
Absolutely.
There was CNN people in the studio here in Moscow, and their eyeballs were like this during the interview, because they were standing around the monitor, and they said, wow, you really gave it to him. He said, well, he didn't know what he was talking about. And, the funny thing is that I was told later that he was hoping that I would pull out my earpiece, take off my microphone, and walk out. He actually almost did that himself, because
wow.
I just gave it back to him. I just said, can you give me a real question? Just a real question, because you sound like a stenographer from the U.S. State Department.
That isn't exactly...
Anyone would talk to him that way.
That's exactly the way John Pilger described the media, is a stenographer for the state. And I think as well, like your analogy there of just giving Cuomo back the facts, that's a really great analogy for what WikiLeaks does, in a sense, is just calling out the reality as it is.
This is what I want all of our viewers to keep in mind, is in a few hours, about 3 hours, I'm going to make a crosstalk with Mark Sloboda and Dmitry Babich, which will be guests on this cast. And we've often reflected, one of the reasons why the mainstream media is very hesitant to engage us, because we know their arguments. They don't know ours. We know their arguments just as well as we know our own arguments. And that's why it's very hard hitting when it happens. And very often, that's one of the reasons why it looks like we're talking in parallel, okay? And
Absolutely.
because well, no, I'll give you a really short example. I was going to a meeting, and it was in a hotel. And unfortunately, the only time I ever see CNN is in hotels and airports. And they were talking about Crimea has been invaded by 25,000 troops. And I just thought, well, they're there under law, international law. In 1991, when Ukraine became an independent country, foreign forces were allowed to stay in Crimea. That's nothing new. Everybody knows that. And see, that's a simple fact that is never mentioned. Is that under international law, a treaty that was signed, it was updated 3 times, but it's not there. Or looking at Ukraine, never wanting to talk about there was a coup there. You know, it was a revolution. No, it wasn't. It was a forced regime change, and nobody wants to talk about that. But in this case, I mean, actually, quite a few very smart people said, yeah, it was pretty open too. But still, you'll never get the mainstream to say, well, in retrospect, looking at all of the facts now, no, that they won't do that, because it's prestige. Only when it's the most blatant mistake, like what was it? You know, during all of these investigations I've had here, I mean, the mainstream media has been caught, you know, with incorrect information and leaks over and over again, and you know, and now, you know, having going back and correcting themselves, it's happened so often now. People are dullened by it.
Yeah, and it used to take decades to unfold, where we go back and say, oh, well, that narrative we spread 10 years ago was false. But now it's happening in real time as it's being produced. And that is like a friend told me, it was the wikification of our culture in the digital age. And it's been, it seems that the establishment has been unable to adapt to that. And that's why they are panicking about WikiLeaks.
No, because they think that they're morally superior to the rest of us. We're just plebes, okay? You know, just going back to Chris Cuomo, you know, don't read those emails, okay? Exactly. That's private property, but we'll tell you, because we're journalists, that's an extraordinary moment. It basically, that on the tombstone of journalism, that's going to be, you know, a plasma that will play over and over and over again, okay? Because that, for me, that was a stunning thing to say. And
absolutely, yeah.
And all of his peers more or less agreed with it. Okay, you know, thank goodness for WikiLeaks, because it's a trusted source. You know, that used to be, well, CNN still calls themselves that, but really it's WikiLeaks. You can trust Julian Assange. You can trust WikiLeaks. They will keep your confidence, and that's what journalism was all about. And it's all gone, and that's why WikiLeaks has replaced it. Okay, and the legacy media cannot come to terms with that. Okay, it would take too much courage. All right.
Absolutely.
And people have just gotten used to not having any courage anymore. Okay. It's extraordinary. You know, they have to look over both sides of their shoulders to make, you know, the corporations and the deep state. Okay. And make sure you go right down that straight line there. Okay. Exactly. Isn't it really shameful to watch, you know, like watching Morning Joe on MSNBC. During the Soviet Union, they had people's courts. And they would have a judge, and then they would have these like peers with the judge. There would be a worker, there would be a farm, what we would call a farmer, maybe a textile worker, and they would be, you know, right next to the judge. They didn't have any legal competence, okay? But the judge would say he's guilty, and then everyone on the panel would, that's right, he's guilty, and that's Morning Joe. You notice that Morning Joe? They say something, and everybody on the panel, that's right, that's right, that's right. I mean, and these are grown people, okay? I mean, presumably they have some kind of higher education, but you wouldn't know that by their behavior. And then it's just like, well, I saw on Twitter today, it's just like, I don't care about snippets, and that's one of the things I have a problem with Twitter is that it condenses everything. I mean, some of the smartest people I've known in my life have gone over to that, and it's like children talking to each other. We need to have, one of the things that I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. I hope that doesn't put too many people off. But one thing that they've learned is that you can have a long conversation with someone, and people will watch. They will get involved in it. You don't have to go to a 40-second soundbite. You can actually have a discussion and a
dialogue.
But that's when we learn. Is when we're challenged. That's when we learn.
Exactly.
And that's how you better yourself. Say, I can be persuaded on that point. That's a good point. It enlarges and enriches my worldview. Why are we afraid of that? And that's what's happened. WikiLeaks, like I said from the very beginning, for me, it was such a relief, is that I'm not crazy. This is all actually true.
Yeah.
It's worse. It was even more elaborate and deep than I ever could have imagined. But my gut told me this is right. Okay. And that was that is like an earthquake. It was an earthquake that and all of the buildings on the landscape were mainstream media, and they collapsed. Okay. They had this moment of just boom and the smoke coming up. And they've been trying to rebuild ever since then. And what they do is they destroy people in the process. I mean, the number of people that have been in alternative media that tell me these really awful stories, demonetized, throttled, disappeared. And these are upright people. You don't always have to agree with them. This is why what makes it authoritarian, totalitarian, is that there is the truth. Well, there is no the truth. We work to get there, and it's a process. It's not the end. It's a process, and that's what we should be doing. And this is what WikiLeaks is all about.
Absolutely,
getting to the truth. It's
definitely.
It's a process. Okay, and I don't see it as partisan either. Okay,
absolutely not. I mean, the sort of motto of Dispute Media is that the truth has no bias, and that's why WikiLeaks is so dangerous, because they just publish the truth. And it's incredibly volatile, obviously, as we've discussed in this entire segment. We have about 9 minutes left. What are some of your thoughts on not only how people can support WikiLeaks, but the incredible loss it would be if Julian Assange were silenced indefinitely, and or if anything were to happen where WikiLeaks would stop publishing or be able to function, the depth of the loss that would be for the public and the public's interest. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that, first of all, those of us that are engaged are going to constantly, like I said, I don't usually do these kinds of forums. Keep the word out, keep talking about it. I'm going to be, after this, I'm going to be telling everyone to take a look at it. I hope a lot of people came on to watch. But I think that the deep state and the intelligence community and the media should be careful what they wish for. Because if WikiLeaks is shut down, if Julian Assange is in one form or another disappeared, there's going to be a new underground. And it'll be harder to watch. You can watch WikiLeaks. You can see what they're doing. They're transparent, okay? That's the beauty of it, transparency. But the next wave may not be as transparent. And the people in power should be worried about that. Because what are you going to do? Are you just going to set up the camps, okay? Are you going to start arresting us, okay? Really? I mean, it's not inconceivable. That's why they have the security state, okay? Is that in the moment they need, they swoop down everybody, all the troublemakers are gone, okay, and everything will be harmonious. But I've seen societies like that. There's never harmony.
And I feel like, yeah, that's definitely one of the things that people don't seem to really grasp, is the gravity of that type of reality and how close we are to really seeing a potential future that looks like that. And WikiLeaks is one of the last bastions of protection of free speech and of, true journalism and information that is protecting the public. And this is the other thing. It's not just, that they're good journalists oh, they really, you know, kicked a few hornets' nests. The information they're providing is actually, you know, arming people with the evidence of crimes against them by their governments, and that is if that was lost, it would be irreplaceable.
And then one of the things I just love to do to pundits is that they talk about how wrong it is to have these leaks of emails, and I just say, well, can we put that to a side? Let's talk about what were in the emails, okay? Let's talk about the documents themselves. We can talk about the, you know, fine, that's a different subject, but that's the only subject they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the content of anything, all right? I mean, you know, over the last few years, I mean, I'm so glad they have search engines and those things, because you could spend your whole life reading everything that's been released by WikiLeaks. That would be a whole lifetime endeavor. Thank God they have the search engines in there.
Yeah, I mean, when I remember Julian Assange actually tweeting out at one point that, you know, he said, you know, we cannot read all of the documents that we publish. Obviously, they verify them, but he said that there are so many things that the viewers, the public, find that he has no idea about. You know, like significant finds that are made that are personal, that are public.
But the interesting thing was when they see the vaults, when those documents came out. Well, I took a look at them, my dear. I'm just not intelligent enough to understand them, okay? I'm not a scientist, but, you know, I know people that say, oh, wow, look at this. It's like being in a candy shop. They understand it, and that's what's really important here, is that there's that milieu of people that understand how the technology of those leaks. I'm more in the political realm, but yes, I mean, there will be people out there that will be able to like I've said, maybe the third time, you kind of confirm what you thought all along, which is really important. And we'll have to, and we can learn how the powers that be are going to try to up their game to make sure it doesn't happen again. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what we have to keep an eye on as well. Like I said, you know, on even days, I can be kind of optimistic because we're doing this after all. On odd days, it just feels like it's so overwhelming. And, you know, we have limited resources. They have endless resources.
Well, one thing I think...
And they don't have a moral compass. I really want to stress that, because that's what, you know, we have to get to the basics here, okay? Journalism has become so nihilistic, all right? And it shouldn't be that way. You have to put yourself out there. You have to put your being and your essence into journalism. And that's what made journalism really great. Edward R. Murrow, okay, one of the greatest journalists of all time. I mean, and when it came to McCarthyism, he was one of the first that said, stop it. It's a disgrace what you're doing. And you know what? People did. But it took someone like that. Julian Assange is an Edward R. Murrow type character, an archetype.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I think that is a fantastic thought to end on, I think, because, and it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. As you said, you don't do these very often, so it's especially a privilege for us to be able to speak with you in this way. I really had a great time.
Well, have me next year. Have me on the next Vigil. Give me a call.
Great. I hope that we don't have to have one, but yes, absolutely do. I absolutely will.
You and Susie are doing a wonderful, wonderful job. And I hope you're drinking a lot of coffee and Red Bull, because it's a lot of talking.
Yeah.